Whispers in the Walls is a collection of original ghost stories that range from haunting to humorous, spun from the minds of the writing team at Tennessee Horror News. These ghostly yarns will transport you to small town America into the depths of the past and neighboring dimensions. In these pages, you will find haunted objects, vengeful spirits, and other worldly horrors. What you won't find is anything you've ever read before. Includes new original stories from Isaac Thorne, Bryce Gibson, Dan Lee, Yeti, Angela McNichols, and Tyler Dean. Available at Lulu.com, Amazon, and Barnes & Noble. Get your copy now.
All right. Sort of a sad state of affairs when you have to jump on a live stream to watch a vampire read those stories in order to feel more pleasant about the world around you. Good evening, spooks and spookcats. I am Count Drahoon, and we're back for another. I never really came up with a good name for these live readings that we've been doing for almost a year. But I tell you what, if you have a good name for this story time that we have, feel free to comment below. But of course, we are reading our way through the Tennessee Horror News ghost story anthology novel, Whispers in the Walls. This is a short story anthology collection of ghost stories, all written from authors who, most of them live within the Middle Tennessee area, or in the southeastern United States, or did at some point. It's a wide net, but they're ghost stories that take place in the South. And it's a fun book. It's a fun read, and of course, we're reading this book so that you will feel enticed to go ahead and purchase this book and help local artists make their dreams come true. Of course, I have a link to where you can purchase the book at the top of the show notes page. And also, in case you didn't already know, I have a podcast called Count Drahoon's Feature Fight, which you can listen to or you can watch on YouTube. Right now, we just dropped part 2 of our radio theater version of House on Haunted Hill. So in case you've never seen House on Haunted Hill, well, first of all, what rock have you lived under? Seriously, I'm over 1,000 years old and I'm not exactly with the times, but even I have a modicum of sense to know when to watch movies because I know that that's what everyone will be talking about. I promise that'll be the only outburst that I have for the evening. But you're doing yourself a disservice if you haven't watched it yet. But you can watch our version. You go down to featurefight.com and, of course, search Count Drahoon on YouTube. And I believe I actually have the links for both on the show notes page. And, of course, if you want to watch the completed episodes of my show, we will be debuting on Troma Now very soon, and I have the link for that as well. And, of course, if you want to support my show or everything that the Tennessee Horror News crew does, you can also buy our merchandise, and I have the links for those in the show notes as well. Isaac Thorne, who is the author of tonight's story, you will have to forgive me, sir. I accidentally forgot to put your author's website in the show notes, so if you don't mind, drop a link in the comment section, and we'll be sure to add it later in the show notes page when we put this episode out on YouTube. Now that that's out of the way, let's go ahead and get to the heart of the matter. Oh, one last thing before I forget, and then we'll jump right into it. I have talked with the authors of Whispers in the Walls, and we have decided that we're going to have a little bit of a contest. After this broadcast, we're going to put a poll on the Tennessee Horror News page of all of the stories that are in this book. And basically, the top 3 of Whispers in the Walls that get the most votes will be made into radio plays for Count Drahoon's Feature of Fright. And of course, the episodes will make their debut on Troma Now. So this is a A perfect incentive for the authors to share the readings, and also it gets you, the audience, engaged to help your favorite local horror writer out. So be sure to participate in that, and that's coming soon to the Tennessee Horror News page. Now that that's out of the way, we'll go ahead and get into the heart of the matter, and hopefully you won't feel the need to drive a stake through it. Here is Practical Ghosts by Isaac Thorne. Joe peered through the smoke-stained glass of the broken window pane and snarled. A group of 3 young men and 1 woman trudged toward the front door. They could not see him. Joe sighed. However, his exhale was not the carbon dioxide-laced water vapor breath of a living man. It created a sickly amber stain against the sun-baked shards that remained standing in the dry, cracked putty of the window's 100-year-old frame. The mucus-like fog lingered there for a second, then vanished. All 3 of the approaching men wore thick black clothes too warm for the season. One of them, the man in the lead, sported an equally stifling beanie atop his dome. Their shoulders and armpits were wrapped in coils of what looked like electrical cable. In the crooks of their arms, they lugged some kind of electronic equipment. Some of it Joe recognized as camera equipment. The woman who tagged along behind them was afflicted by a long, pale, and morose countenance under obviously dyed black hair. She looked like a porcelain doll come to life, as though her face might burst into a million jagged pieces if she never once cracked a smile. A dark grey trench coat swallowed her body entirely. "Ah, Lonnie," Joe said, shaking his head. "Lonnie, Lonnie, Lonnie. You won't move on and leave us alone, will you? Got to squeeze every dime out of this old girl." He patted the windowsill with the phantom fingers of his right hand. He couldn't feel the wood on which he tapped. Not really. Although he watched wisps of dust scatter and whirl in the wake of that touch. "What's going on?" asked a voice from somewhere behind him. Iggy sounded tired. Or bored, maybe. Entities of their stripe, with neither muscles to strain nor bones to grow brittle, never truly felt tired. Joe sensed the other's ghost's presence draw closer to him, felt its energy brush against the outermost tendrils of his own, tickling him a little. Ever since he'd fallen asleep in this place, never again to awaken, Joe had been able to feel the spirits of other formerly living beings around him. Those sensations made sense, given that Joe now existed on the same plane as the other dead. He wondered, though, why he could affect things like dust and glass in the living dimension, but never enjoyed the satisfaction of the sensations that the living experience. If this was hell, the deprivation of his sense of touch had been a particularly unexpected form of torture. "Lonnie's rented us out to another paranormal investigation team," Joe replied. He spat the last 3 words. "Looks like we're in for another night of watching the living pretend to hear us knock about the place while they leap at their own shadows or scream obscenities at a few innocent moths. This crap stopped being funny after the first time. I haven't seen any so-called EVP recorders yet, though. Guess they won't be picking words out of static air this time." Outside, the 4 investigators piled the equipment they had been carrying on the front porch by the door and then made their way back toward what looked like a mid-sized van. Their leader, whose beanie had already given away his level of douche as far as Joe was concerned, hitched up the back of his pants before bending to unload more of their bullcrap ghost-hunting junk. "Well, crap," Iggy said, dejected. "Well, crap," Joe agreed. "Why doesn't he just sell the place, or burn it down for the insurance money? If he's got to keep taking money from TV people, he could at least make the place out for something interesting. A horror movie about a crazy mass killer, maybe. It's been a long time since we had some decent tale around here." "Like you'd get anything out of something like that now," Joe admonished. "Anyway, I don't know why he keeps putting us through this." These so-called ghost hunters must have a crap ton of money if all they do is visit old houses so they can run around and scream at nothing. My guess is there's nothing else old Lonnie can do with the place now that it's gone so far to crap. I think he gave up on trying to rent it after it killed me. Iggy laughed. I remember that. You didn't know you were dead at first. That was fun to watch. Glad you were amused. It's really something, you know. They hunt us. We hole up in the attic and keep our mouths shut while we wait for them to leave. Then they're the ones that run around banging on crap and shrieking like banshees. I wish we could just leave here. I've got places I'd much rather haunt than this old trap, like that old bar down the street. Except we can't leave, Joe said. I found that out right after I died, didn't I? Iggy chortled. Yep, try and walk out the front door, and you end up walking right back inside through the back door as soon as you do. It's like using that side escape trick in some hellish game of Pac-Man. Yeah, Joe replied. He's only tried it that one time when he hadn't yet realized he was dead. It happened the next morning while leaving for work. He walked into what he thought was going to be the bright sunshine of a late summer morning and was immediately struck by the darkness of his own kitchen as he crossed the threshold. When he turned to look out the doorway he just passed through, all that lay beyond was brightly lit backyard. Confused, he then crossed the back door threshold only to discover himself standing on the hard wood just inside the front door in his very own foyer. Yeah, it really pisses me off. Maybe we should start a human hunting show instead of hiding from the ghost hunters this time. Let them broadcast that. Iggy laughed harder. Yeah, maybe we should. The idea struck Joe then, all at once, like an unexplained temperature drop on a Mel meter. He abandoned the view from the window and stared into the oozy, iggy mist that floated behind him. We've been going about this all wrong, he shouted. He caught himself and glanced out the window again. The three male investigators continued to unload equipment while the door-faced female looked on. Another car, this one a silver Lexus with tinted windows, drew up a few feet from the van's open back doors. Each member of the team craned their necks to examine the new arrival when its driver killed the engine. None of them looked back toward the house. They hadn't heard him shout then. We've been going about this all wrong, Joe said, again this time in an appropriately conspiratorial whisper. Instead of hiding from these doofuses and just hoping they'll lose interest, we should be putting on a show for them. If they believed we were really here, they wouldn't spend so much of their alleged scientific investigation acting so gosh darn dramatic and irrational. Maybe we should make sure they know we're here. Really mess with their heads, you know? There was a pause as Iggy processed the thought. And how do you suggest that we do that? He asked. You remember that movie from the 90s about the kid who booby-trapped his house to foil a couple of stupid burglars? Home Alone? I died in 1989. I didn't even get to see Batman. Did you? Was Keaton any good? Joe waved him off, not sure whether Iggy could sense it. Never mind, we don't have the materials or the time to set up any elaborate traps like they did in that movie. Which I didn't see. Right, but there are things we can do. Like, I can't feel anything in this house, but I can still touch stuff and make it react, right? So what if we just follow these idiots around and play a few harmless practical jokes? Some pranks, you know? Stuff that makes them look on camera like the idiots they really are. You mean put some kick-me signs on their backs? We don't have the paper, pen, or scotch tape that we need to do something like that. No, stupid, I mean... The front door creaked open, cutting him off. Its arc landed, the interior doorknob squarely inside what would have been Iggy's butt were he still alive. From behind the door strode a squat, balding man in an ill-fitting grey pinstriped business suit and a yellow diamond-patterned tie. The soles of his Oxfords slapped rhythmically against the old hardwood floor, echoing his footsteps against the walls of the empty room. He ran one thick hand with a golden circled ring finger over the top of his head as he glanced around the place. Then he bade the others enter. "Here you are, folks," Lonnie said. There was a sing-song quality to his voice that grated against that would have been Joe's eardrums if he still had them. "It's all yours until 9 tomorrow morning. Just remember, if you break it, you buy it." That was followed by an insincere guffaw that went unacknowledged by his audience. The team of investigators succeeded him across the threshold, all of them wearing either sneakers or some form of a soft-soled work boot. "All the better to sneak around a haunted house in, I guess," Joe muttered. The bald man swiveled his head in the ghost's direction as if he'd heard something. Joe imagined himself grinning back from the darkness created by the shade of the open door. "Hello there, Lonnie." "Oh, crap," Iggy exclaimed from somewhere ahead of Joe. "I think he might have heard you. Now's our chance. Let's do this." Before Joe could process what was happening, Lonnie collapsed to the floor. He landed hard on his back, striking the crown of his head against the splintery hardwood with a smack. He gasped when the impact shoved all the air out of his lungs. There was another loud crack sound, and Lonnie's head twisted to one side. His nose turned an enraged shade of red that nearly matched the twin streams of crimson liquid that now flowed from his nostrils. All four of the paranormal investigators shrank from the scene, their mouths hanging open and their eyes wide. Joe heard one of them shriek. At first he thought it was the female. When it happened the second time, Joe noted that the squeal had actually come from the mouth of the tallest males, a bearded man with round, wire-rimmed glasses who was wearing a black turtleneck sweater. He reminded Joe of Steve Jobs, except without the moxie. When Lonnie finally managed a ragged inhale that was followed by a coughing fit, another of the male investigators, the male in the beanie, stepped forward. "What the heck?" he shouted. He folded his beefy arms across his cheek. "What the heck, Lonnie? Okay, I admit that was awesome. You need to show me how you did it, but you've got to wait for us to turn the cameras on before you pull a stunt like that. We're not paying you so we can see crap we don't get to record. Save it for after we're already set up and ready for the interview segments. We haven't even started to begin to get going on our setup yet." Lonnie struggled as he raised himself upon his right elbow. He wheezed, trying to catch his breath, but forced himself to answer in spite of it. "Wasn't on purpose, Zeke," he said. "Don't know what happened. Ow!" He touched 2 fingers of his left hand to the ridges that bordered his philtrum and examined the substance that came away on his fingertips. "That blood?" He ran his thumb over those 2 fingers, testing the viscosity. Yeah, blood." He gagged, then rolled onto his hands and knees, attempting to regain his height. He inked 2 bright red fingerprints on the grey wood of the old floor as he did. The beanie man that Lonnie had identified as Zeke, whom Joe noted was sporting mountainous biceps and a face cratered by adult acne, pinched his fingers against the bridge of his nose and gestured to the bearded Steve Jobs twin. "Alan," he said, "you and Ricky help him up. Mindy, grab the first aid kit. I think I left it on the porch." He waited, heard no reply, and then turned to glare at the group. "Move!" Joe glided to a wall opposite the action, where he thought he could see Iggy's form floating. "Not exactly what I had in mind," he said to the other ghost, "but you sure did get their attention." "I've wanted to do that for a long time," Iggy said. He sounded as short of breath as Lonnie, and sniffly, as though he'd been laughing to beat the band. I hate that guy. His daddy raised my rent so high after I lost my job that I couldn't even afford groceries. The only way out I could see was hanging myself with my belt in the bedroom closet. Based on his outfit, I don't think the apple fell very far from the tree, eh? Oh, you're right about that, Joe replied. I'm pretty sure what killed me was carbon monoxide. Lonnie took over the business after you died, and his dad retired. He had monoxide detectors installed all over this place, but none of them worked, and his cheap butt wouldn't replace them. I was just about ready to move out when it got me. Couldn't have been more than 5 years after you. You jerk, Iggy said. You jerk, Joe agreed. I don't know when he got the idea to start renting it out to ghost hunters. As far as I know, neither of us ever made a peep in here. Guess he figured enough time and wear had gone by to make the place look haunted, even if there had never been any reports about it. Heck, Lonnie probably just made up a bunch of crap about us and sold it as fact. That would explain why all the Ouija boarders kept coming through here and asking us questions about witchcraft and demon worship. Idiots. Idiots, Iggy echoed. In front of them, Alan and Ricky had managed to upright Lonnie. They knelt on either side of him, propping him up by allowing him to rest his back against their knees. Each of them had a hand on one of his shoulders. Mindy sat on her haunches between Lonnie's spread legs, facing him. She dabbed neosporin on tiny cuts that had split open on the end of his nose. Lonnie winced with pain at her touch. Meanwhile, Zeke had escaped to the front porch, apparently tasking himself with bringing the team's equipment inside. Joe could see him through the window, bending with correct form to heft a stack of what looked like VCRs without tape slots. Zeke's black sweatpants inched down in the back as he stooped, revealing the mounds of his pasty butt split by about a half-inch of butt crack. A volcanic-looking pimple, as ripe to ooze yellow-white pus as Joe had ever seen, emerged from below his waistband. Joe sneered and reset his gaze on the more appealing Mindy. He took note of the long fingernails that sprouted from her left hand. They were painted a glossy black, complementing her dyed hair and standing in stark contrast to her creepily flawless alabaster skin. The anti-maternal expression on her face neither wilted nor hardened as she nursed the rich man's wounds, even though it was apparent that the sharp ridges on the ends of her fingers were hurting him. Joe wondered whether those claws were doing Lonnie's nose more harm than good. Claws. That prompted a new idea. Joe leaned toward Iggy, who remained giddy about the scene before them, and whispered, I'm going to try something. Watch this. He glided to the spot where Lonnie lay sprawled. While Mindy continued to dab at wounds with her left hand, her equally clawed right hand dangled in the air between Lonnie's legs. Hung there by the right elbow, she was resting on her own thigh. Joe inserted himself into the space between Lonnie and Mindy, sensing her shiver as he did, and grabbed her free hand. He thrust it forward, forcing her open palm to connect with some force against Lonnie's mostly unprotected balls. Ow! Lonnie cried. What the crap are you doing? Joe squeezed. He serpentined himself around Lonnie's nuts and the dorsal side of Mindy's hands and fingers. He clamped them together, vice-like, crushing them with all the strength he could muster from the ambient energy in the room. Somewhere beneath Lonnie's wails of pain and surprise, he heard the cloth of his old landlord's trousers tear against the bite of Mindy's honed fingernails. The outer defenses penetrated. Joe drove Mindy's unwilling digital conscripts home, digging deep into the soft wrinkled flesh of Lonnie's nutsack. Lonnie's eyes bulged from their sockets. Capillaries broke in red lightning strikes across his sclera. His mouth sprang open, lips stretching back from his teeth in a hilariously doggish pantomime. His breath vanished. Every muscle in his body contracted. Alan and Ricky simultaneously rocked backward on their heels as they tried to steady him. He tried to scream, but the only sound he seemed to be capable of summoning was a long and breathless "Ah!" Although her inanimate face belied it, Mindy was panicking too. Joe could feel her trying to yank her right arm free of Lonnie's searing balls, undoubtedly escalating the injured man's agony in the process. Seconds later, Joe felt his strength failing. The ambient energy he had been drawing to force Mindy to crush Lonnie's balls was nearly used up. Maybe Ghost could get tired after all. He relaxed the vice he had created between the two interlopers, finally allowing Mindy to withdraw her weaponized fingertips from Lonnie's crotch. As he glided away from them, Joe noted a crimson stain on the woman's fingertips. He slumped to the floor beside Iggy, who was in hysterics, just in time to see Mindy staring at the blood on her fingers as if she'd never seen blood before. Lonnie lay in a fetal position on the floor, tears streaming down his face, and cradled his throbbing testicles in both hands. He managed a single mournful howl of pain that soon dissolved into a gasping fit of intermittent sniffles and sobs. Between Lonnie's gulps and gasps, Joe could hear Mindy muttering, "I'm sorry. I didn't. It wasn't. I'm sorry." "Oh my God," Iggy exclaimed beside him. "That was epic." "Maybe," Joe acknowledged, "but it took a hell of a lot out of me. Not like I was going to disintegrate there. I need to rest for a minute. Didn't know that we could use up our energy like that." He sensed Iggy attempting to clap him on his phantom back. "You bet, my friend. Rest up. I'll take the next one." A new shadow fell across the floor, interrupting them. Zeke stood just inside the threshold of the open front door, his arms loaded with camera equipment and the waistband of his sweatpants hanging awkwardly low on his hips. Joe caught Mindy's glance at the exposed flesh between Zeke's waistband and the hem of his sweatshirt as she pried her gaze away from the oozing blood that had stained her hand. A shade of pink welled in her cheeks. "Dig it, Iggy," Joe whispered. "She thinks he's hot." Iggy sighed. "Yeah, but she'd change her mind pretty quick if she got to look at what the steroids had done to his package over the years. Me, I prefer pleasing the ladies between the legs, not their eyeballs." "Whatever, dude," Joe replied. "I think we can use that somehow when I get my strength back." Contrasted with Mindy, Zeke looked downright beatish. "What the crap is going on here, guys?" he roared. "Every single battery in this crap is dead. I told you guys to charge this stuff last night. What kind of show do you think we're running here anyway?" He noticed Lonnie writhing on the floor. "What's the matter with him now?" The fact that their batteries had drained interested Joe. Maybe that was where the ambient energy he'd been drawing on had come. He'd need to be careful about exerting himself if all their equipment was dead now. If he used up all himself, who knew what, if anything, lay behind this plane. Alan and Ricky, who were identical masks of bewilderment, shrugged their shoulders in unison. "Got us, boss," Alan said. "We were just holding him up while Mindy was tending to the dude. She just up and grabbed the guy's package all of a sudden. Looked like she was trying to tear it right off." Mindy shot them both a look and then turned pleadingly back to Zeke. "I didn't do it on purpose," she said. "I swear something grabbed a hold of my hand. I don't know what had my hand. It forced me to squeeze. I couldn't get away from it." She paused, casting her gaze first on her claw-shaped right hand and then back at her fearless leader. "Oh, Zeke, I think this place might actually be haunted." She pivoted to face the man writhing in pain beside her. Thick rivulets of blood ran down, flowing over his knuckles and between his fingers. The drippings created dark splatters on the hardwood floor beneath him, coating the fingerprints he had already left there in pools of crimson. "I'm sorry," she repeated. "I'm so sorry." Zeke only stared at her, arms at his side, as if she was trying to process what she'd said, but hadn't quite been able to wrap his mind around it. After a moment, he sighed and shook his head, gazing at his own feet. I guess this is it then, he said. I had hoped to have our season finale in the can by tomorrow, but we can't shoot anything if our main interview is in the ER and our team sidekick is up Crab Creek on assault charges. I'm calling it. We'll have to do something else for the finale. Maybe we can edit together a bunch of outtakes from other episodes or something. Make it one of our extra episodes. Heck, maybe we can make a 2-hour special out of it. Nobody will know the difference anyway. His shoulders quivered then, and he stomped his foot enraged. And what the heck anyway, Mindy? Now we have to get in an ambulance. The MTs are going to want to get the cops involved, and our host is going to have a crap ton of medical bills instead of a paycheck. He glanced sorrowfully at Lonnie. I'm sorry, sir, but no shoot, no moolah. You're a businessman. You know how it is. Just like that, all of Joe's strength surged back to him. They were actually giving up then. Beside him, he sensed what would in life have been Iggy's right hand rise palm forward. Joe slapped it gleefully with his own. Well, he said, that was pretty easy. From his spot on the floor, Lonnie's eyes thrust open wide. He sprang to a squatting position without the aid of Alan and Ricky, his injured testicles apparently forgotten, even though he continued gently massaging them with his hands. The end of his nose had grown bulbous and misshapen by the trauma that Mindy had been attempting to treat. No, he shouted at Zeke. No, I'm not pressing charges. Like she said, the place is haunted. It's really haunted. Stay, do your investigation. It'll prove it's haunted. I'll drive myself to the ER. Tell them it was all an accident or big misunderstanding. I don't know. I'll make something up. Can we do my interview tomorrow after you're done here? You can pay them too. Zeke appeared indecisive, alternating glances at the destroyed man lying on the floor in front of him and the pile of equipment that still sat on the front porch. It was Ricky who finally broke the tension. Come on, Zeke, he said. We've come all this way. We can recharge all of our stuff, and we have some spare batteries to boot. I can say for sure that Mindy's telling the truth, but if she is, then this could finally be our big breakthrough. We might have a real, honest-to-God haunting on our hands. We should at least try to get some evidence while we're here. Think about what that would mean for our show. We might finally outrank that guy over at Ghost Adventures. Zeke sneered, chewing on his lower lip as he thought over it. You're sure about this, he said finally, directing the question to Lonnie. You're not pressing charges? Are you willing to sign a new contract to that effect? We can have one drawn up within the hour, and we'd still have time to start shooting tonight. I'm sure, Lonnie replied, trying to smile in spite of his pain. You draw it up. I'll sign it. And if you boys will help me up here, I'll start making my way to the hospital. My balls feel like they've been ripped in half. His gaze fell on Mindy, who cast her own at the floor. That's quite a grip you got there, young lady. You must work out. She did not answer him. Instead, she stood up, dusting her knees with her hands, and faced the front door. I'll start bringing the rest of the stuff inside, she said. Zeke nodded his reply and stepped out of the way. You too, he motioned at Alan and Ricky. Help him out and get him to his car. Then you get your butts back here and get busy setting up this crap. We've got a lot to do, and we're bleeding time like a stuck pig. He spun on the balls of his feet and followed Mindy to the front porch. He caught the insensitivity he had just expressed towards Lonnie's predicament. Zeke didn't show it. Joe thought it likely that Lonnie really didn't mind. The broken man's eyes were positively teeming with dollar signs. Joe wished he could jam his thumbs into those eyes, straight into the hateful man's socket so far that he pierced his brain, but put out his lights forever. At his side, Joe heard Iggy mumble, "Gosh darn it!" "Gosh darn it," Joe agreed. "Well, what are we going to do now?" "I guess we're going to have to turn it up to 11, Joe replied. "My strength seems to have come back to me. Maybe we can still turn them out." He felt a thrum of excitement from the energy seated beside him. "I got that one," Iggy exclaimed. This is Spinal Tap, right? Ours goes to 11. "Yeah," Joe said. "Congratulations. You got my reference. You're Batman." "Well, whatever you're turning it up to, you'd better do it fast. The two lackeys have almost got old Lonnie on his feet, and the douche has already followed the lady out of the door." "Fine." Joe glided across the room. Out of the ideas, he opted to do the last thing he'd been considering before Iggy interrupted his train of thought. He swept Alan and Ricky's legs out from under them at the heels, causing them to tumble back to the hardwood floor and taking that money-grubbing malignant tumor twerp of a landlord Lonnie with them. The commotion prompted the beanie-clad douche and his stone-faced admirer to race back to the house, which is exactly what Joe had hoped they would do. It was time to put an end to all this bullcrap. If there was consequences to consider, Joe couldn't fathom them. And to heck with the consequences anyway. He was a ghost. What were they going to do? Kill him? Lolly's dollar-hungry eyes flew open wide when he sprawled on the floor between the two would-be ghostbusters who'd been holding him up. Joe took the opportunity to plunge two elongated ectoplasmic thumbs directly into the shiny, soft flesh of each eyeball. The ragged phantom nails of each digit, which in Joe's imagination were modeled on the lady investigator's nails, punctured Lonnie's left and right eyeballs at the pupil, slicing thin, frowning crescents through the corneas and into the irises. Lonnie screamed as tiny ephemera curtains stained what might have been left of his vision. The blood ran in rivulets through the fresh wounds and pooled at the edges of the eyelids that he was now incapable of squeezing shut. The landlord's hands beat at his own face as he rolled onto the back like an inverted turtle, writhing in agony while he tried unsuccessfully to fend off the invisible Joe. Over Lonnie's head, Alan and Ricky skittered crab-like to what they apparently thought might be a safe distance. They watched wide-eyed and mouths gaping, their arms wrapped around each other like children frozen in the sightline of an oncoming boogeyman. "Oh, Jesus, man," Joe heard from somewhere beside him. Iggy had become curious and glided over to bear witness to the mauling. "That looks really painful." On the floor, Lonnie appeared to have heard him. "What?" he screamed, pausing mid-thrash to pick up his ears. "Who said that? Who are you? What are you doing to me?" Joe silenced him by plunging his thumbs deeper into the anguished man's eye sockets. Lonnie's eyeballs all but disappeared into mounds of chunky red discharge that seeped from the edges of their openings and rolled down his face like hunks of molten rock down the side of a volcano. Joe imagined the ends of his ethereal thumbnails growing then, narrowing to points at the ends and then branching outward the way a tree takes root in the ground. He felt it when a small branch from his left thumb found its right hand equal behind the bridge of Lonnie's nose. They combined forces to drill a new sinus cavity for him there. Other, longer branches of nails snaked forward and outward, pulverizing the retinas and severing the optic nerves behind them. Forget the practical jokes plan. Forget the consequences. Forget the paranormal investigation team's rubbernecking looks of disbelief. The landlord had to die. Then, as soon as Joe's thumbnails punctured and shredded the brain tissue surrounding the ends of the optic nerve, all of Lonnie's thrashing and wailing stopped. His right leg twitched once, twice, then lay still. An air in his lungs that was reserved for screaming escaped then in a single mournful bellow that petered out like the pathetic final pop of a multi-stage chili fart. The entire room felt quiet. Behind Lonnie's head, Alan and Ricky continued shivering in each other's arms. Behind Joe and some distance away from Lonnie's feet, Zeke and Mindy stood, likewise agog and unable to speak. Joe was relieved. He felt his strength starting to fade again in the throes of the battle with Lonnie. If he had carried on much longer, he might have winked out of existence. Beside him, Joe sensed Iggy stretching out a phantom hand toward Lonnie's chest. "Dude," he whispered a moment later, "you almost killed him." Joe yanked all his tendrils from Lonnie's thalamus. "What do you mean, almost? He's still got a heartbeat, dude, and he's still breathing. Look." Iggy was right. The stubby man's chest continued to rise and fall in a regular rhythm. And now that he looked at them, Joe could see gore still occasionally pulsating out of Lonnie's destroyed eye sockets. His heart was still beating. "Oh my gosh," someone behind them cried. It was the beanie douche again. "Zeke, is he dead?" He turned to look at Mindy as if she might have better information, even though she stood the same distance away from Lonnie as he did. "Is he dead? What do we do?" He glanced frantically around the room and took 3 long strides toward where Lonnie lay on the floor. "What do we do?" he cried, arms flailing wildly over his head. "Do we call an ambulance? Does anyone know CPR?" Meanwhile, Alan and Ricky had released their holds on each other and were struggling to regain their feet. Joe didn't know what they meant to do to assuage their dear leader's angst, but he wasn't about to allow them to touch Lonnie, not until he finished the job. "Iggy," Joe said, "stop them. It's time we put an end to all of this." "You got it, boss." A second later, Alan's chin jerked skyward, and his head spun around like Apollo Creed, taking the death blow from Ivan Drago. He fell directly in front of Ricky, who then tumbled over his co-worker and face planted. His skull made a rubber-breaking crack sound when his forehead hit the floor. Both men screamed and rolled off of each other to caress their new injuries. "What the hell is wrong with you two?" Zeke roared, stomping toward them as Joe summoned strength to grow new claws that he intended to use to puncture and drain Lonnie's hard little landlord heart. It wasn't easy. All the crew's batteries must have been dead by now. "Iggy?" "On it, boss." Just as he reached Lonnie's spot on the floor, Zeke's entire body was swiveled around, forcing him to suddenly face Mindy and the front door again. It was as if something had grabbed him by the shoulders and careened his entire body 180 degrees. "What's happening to me?" he yelped. Joe glanced back just in time to see the waistband of Zeke's sweatpants plummet from his hips and pull around his ankles. The volcano at the top of his right butt cheek erupted in a bloody spurt of pus and oil. The douche was not wearing any underwear. The rest of his butt was red and pimply as his face. Mindy doubled over in an uncontrolled fit of laughter, whether from the shock of all the day's events or the sight of Zeke's steroid-shriveled balls. Joe couldn't know. Back to work, he plunged his phantom knife fingers into Lonnie's chest, directly above the man's heart. Once inside, Joe slashed at the organ, chopped it, shredded it, until there was no longer chunks of crimson pulp pulsating and overflowing from the caverns that had once been the dying man's eyes. Not long after, he heard, felt, and smelled Lonnie's bowels let go of an extended wet fart that undoubtedly carried with it a load of liquefied crap. Joe couldn't smell anything, but Alan and Ricky stopped nursing their bruises long enough to groan and grab their noses as Lonnie's stink permeated the air around them. "Oh man," Alan moaned. "Oh man, that's it. Game over. I'm out of here." He leaped to his feet and bolted from the door. "Right," Ricky gulped, trying to swallow his gag reflex. "Right behind you." "Hey!" Zeke shouted at them. He tried to pull up his sweatpants while chasing after them, causing him to trip over his own shoes while stepping all over his crumpled clothing. His efforts nearly sent him flying into Mindy, who was now rocking on her butt with her knees under her chin, howling hysterically. "Hey, get back here! What about all our stuff?" "Screw it," Mindy shouted back at him. "Get it yourself." She rolled onto her knees, gained her feet, and chased the other 2 junior members of the paranormal investigation team out the door. Joe and Iggy glided over to the window just in time to see all 3 of Zeke's partners leaping into their van and slamming the sliding door behind them. Joe felt a little lightheaded, dizzy. It was like he had smoked some weed and was getting ready to descend into the cottony blanket of a long winter's nap. He hoped he hadn't used up everything that had been holding him together for so long. Coward, Zeke intoned. He had managed to cover his butt again, and that seemed to have provided him with a kind of renewed sense of dignity. Cowards. "Sure, you go. Make me do all the work." He bent and hefted into his arms the few pieces of equipment that he had managed to carry over the threshold. Then he started toward the door. Just before Zeke was able to cross outside, Joe grabbed the waistband of his sweatpants and yanked them back down to his ankles. He felt euphoric at the results their antics had produced and was not yet willing to let go of that. Who knew how long it had been since Joe had felt anything at all, or how long it might be until he felt anything again? The equipment in Zeke's arms went flying as he tripped over the threshold and did a bottomless face plant on the concrete porch just beyond. Electronic components cracked open and smashed against the porch. At least one of them bounced off the edge and tumbled down the steps toward the van. Joe could see the three round faces of Alan, Ricky, and Mindy peeking from around the curtains that adorned the tiny windows near the rear of the contraption. They were all laughing. Zeke scrambled to his feet and hoisted the sweatpants back to their appropriate height on his body. Fine then, we'll come back for our stuff later. They stormed down the front porch steps toward the van, mumbling something about calling an ambulance or the police or something else. As they watched him climb into the driver's seat, Joe and Iggy shared a phantasmagoric sigh of relief. Joe sensed Iggy's hand in the air again, aiming for a high five. He reciprocated with as much gusto as he could muster, which was not much given all his recently expanded efforts. However, the touch allowed Iggy to transfer some of his energy to Joe, refreshing him, assuring him that he would survive. Guess that's the last we'll see of them, Joe said, laughing. That wasn't exactly what I had in mind when I suggested that we play some practical jokes on them, but I guess it worked. And old Lonnie won't be bringing any more paranormal investigation teams around here now, will he? From behind them, a man's voice said, Why not? Joe and Iggy turned together to face the source of the question. In front of them hovered a somehow both their and not their entity, someone just like them. Occasionally, Joe caught glimpses of a face in the thing. It was the face of a squat, bald man, a landlord who had just died a stinking and violent death at the phantom hands of a former tenant. Where are they going? Lonnie asked. He glided over to where Iggy and Joe had been gazing out at the van. They can't just leave. They still owe me for this investigation. Joe sensed Iggy glance at him in life. It would have been a questioning glance. Something like, what the crap are we supposed to do now? Joe didn't have an answer. It made sense, he supposed. The consequences of dying inside this house were that you became a ghost in this house. But Joe hadn't thought about that when he had, on the spur of the moment, decided to take Lonnie's life. Neither Joe nor Iggy had ever been able to leave the place. For both of them, gliding out the front door meant immediately gliding in the back door. But Lonnie had just died. Maybe he had more energy, more life force than they did. It could be different for him, Joe thought. Heck, perhaps they'd get lucky and he'd just step over the threshold and disappear. Why don't you go after them, Joe suggested. They haven't driven away yet. Maybe you can still catch them if you run now. That seemed to convince Lonnie. The entity that used to be his landlord glided forward, crossed the threshold, and vanished before it hit the front porch. Then there was silence. For a moment, perhaps a second, maybe less, because time was funny here. Joe thought his idea had worked and that the nasty old fart might be gone for good. He was about to say so to Iggy when a pair of hands grabbed at what in life would have been his shoulders and spun him around. What the heck happened to me? Lonnie gasped. Joe sighed. You're dead, Lonnie, he replied. I killed you. You're dead. And now I guess you're stuck here with the rest of us for eternity. The hands fell away from Joe's shoulders. Lonnie slumped against the wall under the window by the front door. Iggy slid down beside him. Joe glanced outside just in time to see the team of paranormal investigators driving away. Then he planted himself at Lonnie's other side. All three entities stared into the open space of the decrepit old house before them as the decomposing vessel that had once been Lonnie's body began to draw the attention of some of the neighborhood wildlife. The shadow of a dog or a wolf or something like that fell across the waning light cast on the hardwood through the open front door. Son of a gun, Lonnie said. Son of a gun, Iggy added. Son of a gun, Joe agreed. All right, and that concludes Isaac Thorne's Practical Ghosts. Just a quick word of warning, well, 2 words of warning. From now on, we're going to have to put the disclaimer in front of the video instead of behind it. I do apologize if anyone was listening and wasn't prepared for some of the adult themes explored in the story. Um, I I mean no disrespect to the authors, of course. Of course, you will notice that in your work there were profanities, and I did the best to censor what I could. Some things sort of came out because if they were not read directly the way they were read in the story, it wouldn't have made a whole lot of sense. So I hope you don't mind that. It is not a disparagement on your great work. I really enjoyed this story. It was a lot of fun. And if for whatever reason it doesn't make it on as a radio play in Count Drahoon's Feature of Fight, I could very easily see this adapted as a movie. This is really, of course, any of them can, but this was a great story. Earlier, you kind of noticed I sort of had this strange look on my face, and it wasn't out of disgust for the work. It was the realization that I totally forgot to warn everybody that we are in the weeds of some really graphic horror, and I forgot to disclaim that in the beginning. And I say that to say that I felt a lot of vibrations on my side, meaning my cell phone is going off like crazy, or the cell phones that the producers let me have. So there is no telling what mayhem we've caused here on social media, but that's okay, because this is what your count lives for. And Isaac Thorne, thank you so much for writing a great story and for contributing to Tennessee Horror News. This was a lot of fun, and it will continue to be a lot of fun. So don't forget that we have a poll that's coming up on Tennessee Horror News. If it isn't already up there by now, but we'll see. And for everyone listening that's a friend of the author, be sure to cast your vote for your favorite story. And next week, we shall return, same bat time, same bat channel, again, cruel sounding analogy, to read my dear friend Yeti's work. She was a work of art. Till then, spooks and spookettes, always remember that as far as things go, when things go bump in the night, there are such things.